In Dar es Salaam, the evening felt normal at first. The city noise drifted in through the windows, traffic in the distance, people going about their lives. Inside the house, though, something small but heavy had just happened. Juma Mwakyusa stood still in the middle of the living room, like his body hadn't caught up with what he had just heard. His wife, Nima Kesi, didn't shout it. She didn't even sound angry. If anything, her voice was calm, almost careless. People only notice you because of me. On your own, no one would even remember you. That was it. No fight followed. No raised voices. Just silence that felt louder than any argument. Juma looked at her for a second, but no words came out. Not because he didn't have anything to say, but because something inside him had gone quiet. Like a switch had been turned off. It wasn't the first time she had said something like that. There had been jokes before, little comments in front of others, small reminders that made him feel smaller than he actually was. He had always brushed them off, told himself it didn't matter. But this time was different. That sentence stayed. Later that night, Juma lay awake, staring at the ceiling while the city kept moving outside. His mind kept replaying moments he had ignored before. Every comment. Every time he laughed it off. Every time he chose silence. For the first time, he wasn't trying to forget it. He was starting to understand it. Juma first met Nima at a corporate event in Arusha. It was one of those events where everyone seemed to already know each other, shaking hands, exchanging contacts, talking about deals and opportunities. Juma was there, but he mostly kept to himself. He wasn't the loud type. He believed in working hard and letting results speak. Nima was the complete opposite. She walked into the room like she belonged there, confident, sharp, and already familiar with many faces around her. People greeted her with respect, some even with excitement. When she started talking to Juma, it caught him off guard. At first, it felt good. Really good. Out of all the people in that room, she noticed him. She asked about his work, listened carefully, and seemed genuinely interested. That alone meant a lot to Juma. But it didn't stop there. She started introducing him to people, important people, business owners, investors, decision-makers, the kind of people Juma had only heard about, not met. For Juma, it felt like doors were opening all at once. He started getting invited to more spaces, more meetings, more conversation. And every time, Nima was right there, guiding him, connecting him, helping him move forward. It felt like support, like partnership, like maybe this was what building something together looked like. But slowly, something else started slipping in. It was small at first, easy to ignore. Little comments like, "Don't forget who introduced you," said with a smile. Or, "You wouldn't have met them without me," said casually in front of others. People would laugh. Juma would smile too, even when it felt a bit uncomfortable. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. To him, loyalty mattered. He believed if someone helped you, you respect that. You don't question it. You don't turn it into a problem. So he stayed quiet. He kept showing up, kept working, kept believing they were building something together. Even when those small reminders started to feel less like jokes and more like something else, Juma chose to ignore it. Because at that time, it still felt like love, mixed with opportunity. At first, Juma didn't notice it clearly. It wasn't one big moment. It was a pattern that slowly built over time. Whenever they were around other people, Nima would naturally take the lead in conversation. That didn't bother him in the beginning. She was more confident, more expressive, and he was okay with that. But then it started going a bit further. If Juma was explaining something, she would jump in halfway and fix it. Sometimes she would laugh and say, "Let me explain it better," like it was just a joke. Other times, she would bring up his past in a way that made people laugh, talking about his humble beginnings like it was something small, something to smile at. People would laugh. The moment would pass. Juma would smile too, but inside, it didn't feel right. It started happening more often. In meetings, at dinners, even casual hangouts. Slowly, it felt like he didn't need to speak because Nima would speak for him anyway. And when she did, she made it sound like his progress was mostly because of her. At some point, people around them started seeing it that way too. If something went well, it became their success at first. But over time, even that changed. It quietly turned into her success. The credit shifted without anyone really questioning it. Juma noticed it, but he didn't react. Instead, he adjusted. He started speaking less during conversations. When he had ideas, he kept them to himself or shared them only when necessary. He became more careful with his words, more observant of how things played out. It was like he was slowly stepping back from his own space, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because it felt easier than correcting it every time. From the outside, everything looked fine. They looked like a strong, successful couple. People respected them. But inside, Juma could feel something changing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was quiet, like he was slowly disappearing from his own story, while still standing right there. That one sentence didn't fade away like the others. It stayed in Juma's mind, repeating itself over and over. No one would remember you. He had heard similar things before, but this time it hit differently. Maybe it was the way she said it. Maybe it was everything that had been building up over time. But now, he couldn't ignore it. For the first time, Juma stopped brushing things off. He started asking himself questions he had been avoiding. Not about Nima, but about himself. How did it get to this point? When did he start feeling smaller in his own life? And the hardest question of all, why had he allowed it? That truth wasn't easy to face. He realized that, slowly and quietly, he had let someone else define his value. Not because he was weak, but because he trusted her. He believed in what they were building. And somewhere along the way, he stopped protecting his own voice. But instead of reacting with anger or starting a fight, Juma did something unexpected. He stepped back. He didn't argue with her. He didn't try to prove her wrong in that moment. He didn't even try to defend himself. That version of him, the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, was still there, but now it felt different. This time, his silence had a purpose. He stopped explaining himself in conversation. When she made comments, he didn't correct her anymore. Not because he agreed, but because he was done trying to fix how she saw him. His focus shifted. For the first time in a long time, Juma wasn't thinking about how others viewed him. He wasn't trying to earn respect in the moment or prove his worth in front of people. He started thinking about himself again. What did he actually want? What was he capable of, without anyone speaking for him? What did his work look like when it stood on its own? Those thoughts stayed with him, especially at night when everything was quiet. And slowly, something began to change. Not outside, not yet. But inside, Juma was no longer trying to prove her wrong. He was trying to find himself again. After that moment, Juma didn't make any big announcement. He didn't tell anyone he was changing. From the outside, everything looked the same. But behind the scenes, he started moving differently. He went back to his old contacts, the people he knew before Nima came into his life. Former colleagues, small clients, people who had respected his work when he had nothing to prove. The conversations felt different, simpler, real. There was no pressure to impress, no shadow to stand under. Juma also started focusing on himself again. He looked at his skills honestly, what he was good at, what he had ignored, and what needed improvement. Instead of depending on connections, he put his energy into becoming someone worth noticing on his own. His nights changed. While everyone else was sleeping, Juma would sit with his laptop, planning, learning, reaching out, and building. Sometimes it was slow. Sometimes it felt like nothing was moving. But he kept going. He stopped chasing big moments and started paying attention to small opportunities. A short meeting, a simple project, a chance to prove himself without noise. Each one became a step forward. And the most important part, he stayed quiet about it. He didn't post about his progress. He didn't try to show people he was doing something new. He didn't even try to change how Nima saw him. That wasn't his focus anymore. This time, he wasn't building for validation. He was building for himself. There were days it felt frustrating, days he questioned if it was even worth it. But then he would remember that sentence, not with anger, but as a reminder of where he never wanted to go back to. So he kept working, slowly, patiently, and without needing anyone to notice. Piece by piece, Juma was rebuilding something that had been slipping away for a long time. His confidence, his voice, and most importantly, his identity. At first, the changes were small. So small that no one really paid attention to them. Juma started getting calls on his own phone, people reaching out to him directly, not through Nima. Some were old contacts reconnecting, others were new people who had heard about his work. The conversations were different now. They weren't asking about Nima. They were asking about him. Then came the invitations. Meetings, small events, business discussion. this time with his name clearly mentioned. Not as someone's +1. Not as Nima's husband. Just Juma. It felt unfamiliar at first. For so long, he had been used to standing slightly behind, letting her lead, letting her speak. Now, he was being asked for his opinion, his ideas, his perspective. And the more he showed up, the more people started listening. Respect didn't come all at once. It built slowly. One conversation at a time. One project at a time. One impression at a time. And the interesting part was, he didn't talk about it at home. Nima didn't notice anything in the beginning. Why would she? From her point of view, everything looked the same. Juma was still quiet, still calm, still not reacting to her comments. So she continued the same way she always had. She would speak for him in conversations, make her usual remarks, carry herself like nothing had changed. And Juma let her. Not because he agreed, but because he didn't feel the need to correct her anymore. This time, he understood something important. He didn't have to explain his growth. He didn't have to argue for his value. If it was real, it would show on its own. And it did. Outside the house, people were already seeing the difference. They were treating him differently, listening more carefully, respecting his input without needing an introduction. But inside the house, that shift hadn't reached yet. And Juma was okay with that. He stayed focused, kept working, kept moving quietly. There was no rush to prove anything. No need to force a moment of realization. Because deep down, he knew something Nima didn't know yet. The ground beneath her assumptions was already changing. And soon enough, she wouldn't be able to ignore it. The invitation came quietly, just like everything else in Juma's life lately. A major business conference in Nairobi, Kenya. This time, it wasn't for networking or attending with someone else. He was invited as a keynote speaker. For a moment, he just stared at the message. Not because he doubted it, but because he understood what it meant. This wasn't an introduction from anyone. This was his name, his work, his consistency finally being seen. When he told Nima, she didn't react much. She nodded, almost like it was expected. In her mind, this was just another event where she would naturally stand out. The day of the conference, the room was full. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, people from different industries, all gathered, talking, waiting. Nima walked in with her usual confidence, greeting people, carrying herself like she belonged at the center of it all. Juma stayed calm. When his name was announced, there was a brief pause, then he stood up and walked toward the stage. No rush, no hesitation, just quiet confidence. At first, the room was still. Then he started speaking. Clear, simple, direct. He didn't try to impress anyone. He spoke from experience, from the work he had done, from lessons he had learned the hard way. And slowly, something shifted in the room. People started paying attention. Phones went down. Side conversations stopped. Eyes stayed on him. They weren't just hearing him, they were listening. As he continued, you could feel the respect building. Not forced, not polite, real. The kind that comes when people recognize something genuine. Nima was sitting in the audience, watching. For the first time, she wasn't the one controlling the room. Juma was. And it wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no need for that. It was in the way people reacted, the way they leaned in, the way they responded to his words. By the time he finished, the applause wasn't just routine. It meant something. In that moment, it became clear. This wasn't influence that came from being connected to Nima. This was something Juma had built on his own. Quietly, patiently. And now, it was undeniable. When the event ended, people didn't rush out like they usually do. Instead, they moved toward the stage, toward Juma. One by one, they came up to him. Some shook his hand, others stayed longer, asking questions, sharing thoughts, telling him how much his words connected with them. They mentioned specific points from his talk, repeating his ideas back to him, showing they had really listened. You explained that so clearly. That perspective was different. We should connect. I'd like to work with you. It wasn't random praise. It was real interest. Juma stood there, calm as always, thanking them, having short conversations, exchanging contacts. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just being himself, the same person he had been all along. A few steps away, Nima stood quietly. For once, no one was coming up to her first. No one was asking her to introduce them. No one was looking past Juma to get to her. They were there for him. She watched the whole thing without saying much. Her usual confidence was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. You could see it in her eyes. She was noticing something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. For years, she had believed she was the reason behind his growth. That without her, he wouldn't stand out. But now, standing in that room, she was seeing a different reality. Juma didn't look lost without her. He didn't look dependent. He looked complete. And the respect he was getting wasn't connected to her in any way. No introductions, no reminders, no credit shared. It was his. Juma noticed her standing there, but he didn't walk over to explain anything. He didn't try to make a point. He didn't say, "Now you see." He didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said was already happening right in front of her. The conversations, the attention, the respect, it all spoke louder than any argument ever could. When they finally left the venue together, the energy between them felt different. No tension, no confrontation, just a quiet space filled with understanding. And in that silence, for the first time, Nima saw him clearly. That night, back at the hotel, things felt different. The room was quiet, but not in the same way as before. This silence wasn't heavy or tense. It felt honest, like something had finally come to the surface and couldn't be ignored anymore. Nima was the first to speak. She didn't have the same confidence in her voice this time. There was no sharpness, no control. She sounded unsure, like she was trying to find the right words but didn't fully know where to start. "I didn't realize," she paused, then looked at him. "I mean, today, I saw things differently." It wasn't a full apology. Not yet. But it was the closest she had come to questioning herself. Juma didn't interrupt her. He just listened. For a long time, he had imagined this kind of moment going differently. Maybe with anger, maybe with him finally saying everything he had kept inside. But now that it was here, he felt calm. He wasn't carrying that frustration anymore. Nima continued, trying to explain, trying to make sense of what she had seen. But her words weren't as strong as they used to be. For the first time, she wasn't speaking from certainty. She was trying to understand. When she finally went quiet, Juma looked at her and spoke, slowly and clearly. "I was always this person." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush his words. "You just never saw me, without needing to be above me." The room went still again. But this time, the silence felt different. There was no anger in his voice, no blame, just truth. And that truth landed heavier than any argument ever could. Nima didn't respond right away. She just sat there, taking it in. Because deep down, she knew he was right. It wasn't that Juma had suddenly changed or become someone new. He had always been this capable, this steady, this clear. She just hadn't allowed herself to see him that way. Not fully. That moment shifted something between them. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a real, undeniable way. Because sometimes, it's not anger that changes things. It's clarity. Months later, Juma's life had changed in ways that were quiet but real. His work no longer relied on anyone else's name or connections. People reached out to him because of what he had built, because of his ideas, his consistency, and the way he handled himself. His reputation wasn't loud or flashy. It was steady, earned step by step, project by project, late night by late night. At home, things had shifted too. His relationship with Nima wasn't the same as before. It wasn't about control or proving who was more important. Instead, it was about boundaries he had learned to hold. He spoke when he needed to, stepped back when it was necessary, and never let someone else define his worth again. That quiet strength made the difference. Looking back, Juma understood something he hadn't fully realized before. The strongest response to someone who doubts or underestimates you isn't arguing, shouting, or trying to prove them wrong. It's simpler and harder at the same time. It's about becoming undeniable through your work, your focus, and your consistency. It's about showing up for yourself every day, quietly, without needing recognition. And sometimes, he thought, the moment someone underestimates you isn't a moment of weakness. It's the moment you finally start to see yourself clearly. That moment, that turning point, gave him everything he had been missing: respect, clarity, and a sense of self that no one could take away. Juma had chosen himself, and in choosing himself quietly, he had become impossible to ignore.